So talk about the challenges of creating a leading man that's not necessarily likable.
It's not a, it's, I mean, it's a challenge, but you don't view it as a challenge, you view it as an opportunity. That's what writers want to do. I mean, the fact is most network leading men are exactly what writers don't want to do. I mean, traditional, the stereotypical good guy who saves the day constantly and is just kind of flawless. That's not what writers want to do. Writers want to write complicated characters who are good in some ways and bad in some ways, but ultimately rise to the occasion in some ways and don't rise to the occasion in some other ways. That's interesting. So, you know, I've always had the attitude that I would write what I found interesting, and if it worked, it worked, and if it didn't, I'd be a lawyer. And I genuinely was content with that, and so I found this character interesting. I mean, it's a challenge to find it, but it was interesting to me, and so. But I spent months and months trying to make it work and make it pop, make it funny enough, and make it clever enough, and just at a certain point, you reach that point where you go, I like this guy. I'm interested in this guy. I want to watch this guy. And I think it'll be really interesting watching the things he does down the road. And that's the other thing you have to make sure you got is, and I did feel good about this. I knew that if it all worked out that I had a character that I would want to watch week after week after week, that the decision on what he was going to have for breakfast would be interesting, hopefully. I didn't think it would have a massive audience, but which is a little weird because you're sort of thinking, oh, this is an interesting niche character that will appeal to a certain type of people, and then you find out, oh, we're all that type of people. To some extent. That's not to say everybody liked the show, but obviously did extremely well.
So, but were there boundaries that you purposefully set for his personality?
Not really, no. Well, not in the sense of anything was theoretically fair game. Obviously, couldn't swear. We were on network TV, but the attitude was always when he was, and this was, you'd see freelance, you know, drafts of House, and everybody would get excited about what's he going to say, what nasty thing he's going to say, and I felt I could make him as nasty as, and even with the writers when we talk about it, he could be as nasty can be, as long as there was a reason behind it. It didn't have to be a really perfect, flawless reason, but it had to be, he had to have an agenda, and the agenda had to be not about just enriching himself, doing anything for himself. It had to be about pursuing the truth. As long as he was doing it, trying to pursue his version of the truth or whatever, it was okay. As long as it wasn't for his personal motive. The saying we had was, the punishment doesn't have to fit the crime, but there has to be a crime. If he's going to be nasty to somebody, he can be nasty to them like crazy, as long as they've done something to deserve it, with the word deserve loosely defined. It can be a disproportionate punishment. But as long as he has an agenda there, it was all okay. If it was just being nasty because it was a funny line or just to be clever, then we didn't do it.
Do you feel like he ever went too far?
Not really. You know, my bigger worry was he wouldn't go far enough. My bigger worry was that we confirm for the audience in some way that he's actually nice. You know, that was what I think was driving that character, is people were imposing, because he was saving lives. I mean, that's what allowed him to get away with all this stuff, ultimately, is he was saving lives. But if people actually believed he cared, I think that was the death of the series. I think it was okay for people to impute that, for people to apply that, but if I were to ever prove it, I think that would have been the death of the series. If we one day showed he's actually nice, it would have killed the show. The end of season 7 was our most controversial, where we arguably went too far, where after his breakup with Cuddy, he drove his car into her living room. And I think a case could be made that we did go too far there, not because it was too violent. He was clearly not trying, to me, as people thought, he could have killed her. He was trying to kill her. That's my imitation of people online who I don't agree with. I dismiss them by putting on that voice. to me, he was clearly not trying to kill them, and he had seen through the window, he'd seen that they were out of the room, but also the fact that he smiled as he walked away, to me, and said he had accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. So he did not want to hurt anybody. But the reason I think that may have been going too far is because it was a very irrational act by a very rational man. And it's a man who did do irrational things from time to time, but didn't want to, and wasn't pleased by it when he did it. And he was always striving to remove himself, to remove his emotions from a situation in order to see through the situation to the absolute truth.
So talk about casting Hugh Laurie in that role and what he brought to it.
We read a lot of people, and we met with a lot of people, and we've been offered it to a number of people, but it wasn't really working. The people would come and audition, and I would sort of think that was working. You know, they'd come in, the funny stuff would work, but the dramatic stuff wouldn't, or vice versa, or even more complicated than that. I don't even know what it was, but it just wasn't working, and it was very strange. It's a good Hollywood story. Hugh Laurie was in Namibia. Every time I say that, it sounds funny coming out of my mouth. Shooting, it shouldn't. It's a completely legitimate name for a country, and they should be proud of that country. But he was there, and shooting a movie, and his agent sent him the sides for the scenes that people were auditioning with. And Hugh tells the story that he thought he was auditioning for the sidekick. He read the scenes. It wasn't called House then. It was an untitled pilot. And clearly in his mind, the show, it's an American TV show, it's going to be about the good-looking, caring doctor who happens to have a friend who's a bit of an ass, who's just the sidekick. But he wasn't. But he put himself on tape. He went into a bathroom of his hotel room there, put himself on tape. It's on the season 1 DVD. And he put himself on tape and sent it in, and we watched it, and a light went on. It just was, that is what I had in mind from, and I may not even been completely aware of it, but it just kind of all synthesized in that moment. I realized, yes, that is exactly what this character is. And it's been a wonderful situation where from day one, and this is not always the case, it's basically never the case. The things Hugh liked about this character were the things I liked about the character, and he was reacting to the character in the exact same way I was, and so that helped us just go down the road and have a wonderful time with it.
Had you been a fan of his earlier work?
I had seen his English comedy work. Growing up in Canada, I'd been exposed more than Americans were to Fry and Laurie and Blackadder. I was a huge fan, and when I heard he was auditioning, I was thrilled and was thinking it would be great if I got to meet him, but I just knew his comedy stuff, and I was completely convinced that he could not do it. I just figured it'd be fantastic to get him in to meet him, and then you see him, and he was brilliant. Who
else had you offered the part to?
I can't remember all the names. There weren't that many. I know we offered it to Gary Sinise, who wound up doing CSI New York, so that worked out for everybody. I think Patrick Dempsey, I think we offered it to, again, worked out very nicely for everybody. And by the way, Bryan Singer, we'd watched, we'd had a few English guys audition, and Bryan Singer finally had said no more English actors because the TV schedule is just crazy for the accent to get around that. And then Hugh put himself on tape, and Bryan was completely unfamiliar with Hugh's work and just went, this is the kind of guy we need. This all-American guy. I think he actually said that, and of course we had to inform him that he's English, but Hugh did the accent perfectly, although from day one to the very last day, that was, according to Hugh, his biggest challenge in doing the role was the accent.
You would never know it.
No.
Did he have a voice? Did he have a coach that...
Not that I know of. I know that most of the time he didn't. I don't know if he ever tried one and then rejected it, but he never did. He had a tremendous ear.
And then talk about the rest of the casting process and assembling House's initial team.
It was great having a big-time movie director helping us out. Bryan Singer was fantastic because typically what happens is the networks insist that you go in with at least two choices for them. And Bryan was very good at saying, no, you're getting one choice because we only like this person. This is the only person who can do it. We brought him a couple of choices on a couple people, which I'd rather not go into. But, you know, it was, I remember Omar reading with Hugh in the room. And I remember when Hugh auditioned, when we flew him in and he auditioned, and I felt, and you're in this horrible, horrible room with 20 people watching you reading from sides, and you're sitting there and they're judging you, and they're judging your entire life, basically, your future on it. And Hugh was just fantastic. It's the only time I've ever been in an audition where I felt like standing up and applauding after he was done, because that was it. And they'd been pushing us younger, 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 until Hugh came in and they went, okay, yeah, that's the guy. There was I'd love to be sitting here going, nobody wanted him, but I saw the genius there. It was pretty obvious from day one to everybody. Omar came in and read with them, and it really worked nicely. Lisa, again, Lisa, as soon as she got in a room with Hugh, there was sexual tension, and that was so wonderful to work with. Jesse wasn't scripted as Australian, but we decided not to force two people to change their accent. It was scripted as somebody from San Diego who was running as far away from his parents as possible. So Australia worked even better. Jennifer's kind of a funny story in the sense that, again, we were looking for two people, and then Bryan Singer went home with a whole lot of DVDs, if it was DVDs or VHS tape, and watched a whole bunch, and then he chose two actresses that he liked from the whole thing, one blonde and one brunette, and they were both Jennifer Morrison. She had been, he didn't even realize it. She had been a brunette in something and a blonde in something else, but those are the two actresses he liked.
Good odds for her.
And I remember when Robert came in and read, and Gail Berman, who was fantastic and really supportive and really helped us through the whole thing and put us on there and defended us. I mean, that character is tricky, but I understand internally she defended us, that people may have wanted to water him down a bit, but they never really did. But when Robert was auditioning for the part, Gail had one note, which was that he should be just friendlier, kind of boy next door, a little less, just a nicer guy, I think was the note. And Brian went, great, that's great. And Robert's out of the room at that point. What happens, they come in, they read, they leave, then you talk about them, and then Brian goes out and says, here's what you need to do, come back. So Brian goes out, he's out in the room for a while, and I'm sitting there going, I don't think that's right. I think Wilson has to have some edge. There's got to be a reason that he's House's friend, and there's got to be a reason that House is his friend, both ways, and there's got to be something just marginally off about this guy in some way. I think it's wrong. And so I said, excuse me, and I go out in the hall and find Brian and Robert, and they're sitting at the end of the hall talking, and I go, I'm not sure that's a good, and I get about that far out, and Brian goes, oh, it's a terrible note. But we do it this way, he gets the part, and then we shoot it however we want. So sorry, Gail.
And did you ever have Robert read with Hugh?
I don't remember if Robert read with Hugh, but I should remember, but I don't remember. I don't think Robert did. Hugh had flown into town, then flew out. I know he read with Omar. I don't think he read with Hugh.
So talk about filming the pilot.
Shot it up in Vancouver. Again, it was just, it was the process that people never have. It was just from, as I said, the approval process for the script was seamless. Bryan Singer apparently read 8 pages of the script and phoned up his agent and said, I want to do this. Then once we got Hugh, it was great. And then, so we went up to Vancouver for 3 weeks and shot up there, and Bryan did a beautiful job. And it's a nice time for a writer while they're shooting your pilot, because while they're shooting episode 3, 4, 5, 162, you're worried about episode 163 and worried about the one before and all that. All I had to worry about was this, and I didn't even really have to worry about this because Bryan was great. Bryan was, the type of director you want because he really protected the words. It certainly wasn't perfect, and there were, Bryan had a bunch of notes, and I made those notes. But Bryan, more often than not, would just, the network would have a note, and he would tell the network why it doesn't work, and he would defend something in the script passionately, and I'd go, oh yeah, that is there. That's cool. And Hugh would do the same thing. There was one scene I remember where, the very first scene where we see Hugh House for the first time. And I can't remember what the issue was, but Brian started realizing, no, this isn't working. The information has to come out in a different way. And so I'm getting this, and being an insecure writer, I'm going, yeah, you're right. What can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And figuring it out. And so we had like we're in the middle of the day, and we just sort of stopped filming for 45 minutes while we're trying to figure out how to restructure this scene. Him and I just standing in the hallway talking. And then Hugh comes over and goes, what's the issue here? And Brian goes, well, you see, this has got to be this. And then Hugh went, but isn't it cool that the first thing we see out of his mouth is, cancer's boring, you know, she's going to die. Cancer, boring, she's going to die. And Brian went, yeah. And we went right back to the same thing. So again, I had an actor who defended me when I wasn't ready to defend myself, and I had a director defending me when I wasn't ready to defend myself. And so, and Brian shot that in a real cool way. The whole scene, it's shot, we're on his feet and on his cane. We did the teaser where he's not in it, and then this is the first scene with House, and just starts with the feet and the cane, him and Wilson talking about nothing, really. Talking about what it's like to be a doctor, just bickering about what it's like to be a doctor. And then he's trying to get him to take a case. And then you come up, and I believe the first words out of his mouth on camera are, cancer's boring, she's going to die, which is kind of what separated that character.
Definitely. So talk a little bit about the opening credit sequence and the theme song for the show. How were those developed?
Bryan Singer. Completely Bryan Singer. Both those things were all Bryan Singer. He came in one day with that music and said, you got to listen to this, you got to listen to this, it'll be great, it'll be great. And the same thing with the opening credits. He was thinking about it, and has thought about medical stuff, various aspects representing various people, and he did some mock-up version of it, and we got some people to actually professionally do it, but it was Brian's notion.
Oh. So when the pilot aired, what was the critical reaction to it, and the fan reaction, viewer reaction?
The critical reaction was very positive. You know, it wasn't universal, but it was damn close to it. I mean, there were a few publications that didn't like it, and I still haven't forgiven them. But it was very, very positive. Fox was very excited. Fox liked it. The myth is that we were on the verge of being canceled early on, and our numbers weren't great. But we premiered in November. We premiered fairly late. We were the last Fox show to premiere, and I believe, aside from our lead-in, every other one of the Fox news shows had been canceled already by the time we started, which made me feel very confident, actually, because I felt like can't cancel us. They don't have anything to fall back on. And although our numbers were mediocre, our numbers were literally double our lead-in, which was another news show. It was an unscripted show, but I think we had a 100% bump from our lead-in. So we had mediocre numbers, but we were twice as good as the show before us. So, and they'd announced as well that they were going to have us follow American Idol in the new year, which was their plum spot. So our numbers were mediocre, but I never really worried about cancellation. Although I started worrying about it as it went on, because around Christmas time, they came to us with a bunch of notes and basically said our future depends on us implementing those notes. And okay, they mean it. I kept expecting them to pick us up because they figured they had no choice, but they literally didn't pick us up right through Christmas. I mean, we finished shooting our first order at Christmas without a back order, without any additional orders. And we had options on all the actors and the crew, but we shut down not knowing legally whether we were coming back. We were all very confident we were coming back, but we didn't have any contract.
And what was the gist of the notes that you had to address?
They had like 3 notes, and I said yes to 2 of them, and I said no to 1 of them. The one I said no to was they wanted a nemesis for House. They wanted somebody trying to bring House down. And I said no to that, because I said that's kind of Colonel Klink. And that worked in Hogan's Heroes, but this is not Hogan's Heroes. And I had spent a lot of time thinking about Cuddy, about the character of Cuddy, and and I explained this in the room, what would work and what wouldn't work, and how to make that boss character work. Because if the boss is just, House, you have to stop this, either she fails and becomes just a cartoon all the time, and dumb, too, because he keeps succeeding, in not only in defeating her, but in saving lives. So why is she saying no? On the other hand, if she just lets him do anything, there's no point in having her there. So I had to walk that line of somebody who knew House's potential and knew what was good about House, but also knew what was bad about House, and tried to control him when it was appropriate, but let him slip through at times without completely losing control of him. And so I spent a lot of time on that, and they kind of wanted a bigger nemesis. And I said no, and I explained my reasons, and they went, you should get them sitting down here, because they obviously had a very different version of what happened in that meeting. And they said, thank you, okay, we get that. And that was the end of it. And then the next day I was getting on a flight with my family overseas. And while I was on the flight, they called up Paul and Katie and said, hey, so when are we going to see some stories about that nemesis? And so I was overseas and with my family for like a week. And I wound up every night, I'd spend the time with my family because the time changed. Just every night I would spend trying to make that work. And that's when the character of Vogler came along. And Shy McBride was fantastic, and I liked what we did with it. But when I came back, I called up my current person at Fox and said, we've developed this 5-episode arc for this guy, at the end of which he leaves. And you can take that up the ladder if you want or not, but I'm telling you, he leaves at the end of these 5 episodes. This is just not good for the show long term. I can make it work in a limited scope of a real nemesis, but somebody's got to win if you're setting it up like that. Either House wins or he wins, and obviously he's not going to win. So I said, you can take that up the ladder or not, and I don't think he ever did. But I'm done with this character after 5 episodes, and I don't care if you cancel us. I just don't. It's not right for the show. And then they kept pressuring us about that character. I mean, I like telling this story because it's a clear victory for my side. And it says something about Hollywood, too. It says something about the business, because they specifically were saying that they kept pushing us on this character, make him meaner, make him do whatever, kept pushing us, make him pop more, whatever. Pop more is good, meaner is not so good necessarily. But I kept pushing back a little bit. But they were coming right out and saying, the future of this series depends on this character. Okay, so now I leave it at that. And then what happened was, before that character's arc ever aired, we started following American Idol. And our numbers went up. And before that character's episodes ever aired, they ordered 5 episodes, and that was all they ordered. So we were up to, I think, 18 for the year, or 17 for the year. And so the numbers went up, and they ordered 4 more. And then our numbers kept going up. And still before that character's episodes ever aired, they ordered a 2nd season. So the episodes that had all been shot before Christmas were the ones that aired and got us a 2nd season, in spite of the network telling us that your future depends on this character. Our future didn't depend on the character. Our future depended on the numbers.
Right. How important was humor to the show?
I think it was pretty essential. I think a lot of what people, I mean, it's tough to pin anything. There's an alchemy to a TV show, and you take away any one thing, it all changes. That's not to say that one, but it could be, there's 8 different one things that you take out, and you lose everything. And humor was certainly one of them, and Hugh was so good at that. But first of all, it's what I like doing. I started with Due South, which had a sense of humor. All my shows I've tried to bring a sense of humor. And Hugh was fantastic, number one, because he can deliver a joke. He has a huge amount of experience, but also he never felt, certain actors who don't have a lot of experience with that will feel, ooh, it's the funny time. And certain directors will feel that way too. He never felt he had to play into it, never felt he had, and there were times when he said too many jokes. And we pulled back. But he also had this ability, I think because of that experience or whatever, or just because he's brilliant, he had an ability to deliver a joke in the most dramatic scenes and have it be funny without losing any of the dramatic import of the scene. There was something amazing that it just freed us up as writers to write anything, like not anything, but largely just about, or just in the middle of some scene where he's talking to somebody about how they're dying or whatever, he makes a joke, and yet those eyes or whatever, we still realize the import of the scene.
Right. You talked a lot about humanity throughout the course of the interview. What were you trying to say about humanity through House?
Yeah, another line, another T-shirt that we made up in season 1 is "Humanity is Overrated," which was an episode which that certainly was, you know, along with truth, but parallel to truth. The emotion versus the intellect. That was a big part of the show. Again, in the pilot, I think it was in the pilot, would you rather have a doctor hold your hand while you died, or would you rather have a doctor treat you like crap while he cured you? And humanity, to some extent, is synonymous with caring. And House didn't care about caring. He cared about results. There have been so many things in the history of mankind, so many horrible things done in the history of mankind with the best intentions. And, that's what House saw. House didn't care. House didn't care if your heart was in the right spot. If what you did resulted in something bad, then you're wrong.
There are a number of cast changes throughout the course of the series. Was that always intentional? Was it course correction in your mind? Why did you?
No, the first big one, which was really the one really big one, happened. I didn't have it in mind at the beginning because I never imagined, I just don't think in those terms. I think, oh, I got a few episodes ahead of me. Great. I'd never imagined it going 8 years. I never imagined it going 3 years. It would go as long as it would go, and every episode I'd be lucky to have. And then suddenly I found myself at the end of season 3 going, at the beginning of this show, we said that they're on a 3-year fellowship. Well, we're through 3 years. And I've got a situation where, number one, contractually it said they're doing 3 years. Number two, this is a guy that I can't imagine people work.
No problem. Okay, so you were talking about the cast change.
Yeah, so number one, 3-year contract. Number two, who's going to put up with this guy for that long? Number three, fundamentally, what was interesting in this show was House reacting to people and reading people and figuring people out. And so the opportunity to bring in other interesting people for House to analyze. And again, they had to be interesting people. That was really important to me, that they're not just be, straw men. The people, House is only as smart as the challenges that we confront him with, which means he's only as smart as the mysteries he has, and he's only as smart as the people that challenge him. So bringing in new people would just seem like a natural thing to do, and it seemed like the right thing to do. We liked both. We liked all the people we had, and we kept them around. I liked what we did with them in the sense that we put them in a different situation, but it did become very difficult to service them in an interesting way week after week after week when they were in such a limited part of it.
And to replace his first team of fellows, he had a competition. Did you feel like you were kind of testing out different people to find the right fit?
We clearly were. That kind of came to me in a flash, actually, but it was like one of those things where I was in the shower and it occurred to me, and I had to rush to work because I really liked the idea. It just felt right for him, because we had decided to get rid of them, but we hadn't quite figured out how to replace them, what process we would use to replace them. And then I just realized, and reality shows and stuff like that, Survivor and all that were big then, but it just seemed right. It seemed to make sense. It seemed like a gimmick that actually made sense to House, that he is not the type of guy who would interview 45 people and hire 3. He would hire 45 people and then fire 42 of them. And so that's what we did. And in fact, we had series options on, I think, 5 or 6 of them. And as a writer, you're just kind of going into that going, oh, this is cool, this is great. And then you realize, oh, actors are human beings. You forget that. And you realize they're all taking each additional script and flipping to the last page to see who gets fired that week. But they were all great, so we were planning on keeping 3. We ended up keeping 4, and then a 5th one we brought back later, even afterwards, because the nice thing about being a respected, successful show is actors want to do the show. So we got some really good people that were doing it, and we had a nice time with that.
You talked about how your personality fits into House's personality. Is there a little bit of you in each of the main characters in the show?
I suppose so. It's more obvious with House, his attitudes toward life. I mean, he's smarter than I am and therefore more confident about his opinions than I am. And he can be bolder and therefore more aggressive and ruder than I am. But basically his attitudes are my attitude. Having said that, each of the characters, their actions had to somehow make sense to me. They had to be rationalized to me, so in that sense, I was in each of them. You know.
So talk a bit about some of House's personal struggles, starting with his addiction. Why did you?
I think Cuddy's sense of humor was mine too, actually. So.
I can see that. Why did you decide to give House that addiction?
That was something we talked about a fair bit, Paul and Katie and myself. The whole disability, the leg and the pain, all connected to a realization. This is why we fought so hard against the network, going, make him younger, make him younger. They wanted a young, traditionally good-looking guy. To me, if House had been a young, traditionally good, a 35-year-old traditionally good-looking guy, you would have hated him. Because a guy who's good-looking and healthy and got the world on a string, you just go, shut up. When he starts complaining about life, you just go, shut up. Your life is good. We needed somebody who had been beaten down by life. So it had to be a little older, be a little craggier, and had to have suffered. And it was a very nice metaphor as well, that he's damaged on the outside as well as the inside. And he's in pain. He's in pain. You'll forgive him a lot because he's in pain, which was an interesting thing we explored from time to time, that people treat him differently because he's in pain, which was to us internally slightly meta in the sense that we knew the audience was treating him slightly differently because he was in pain. But we all do.
So why then the addiction? Why wasn't the leg, suffering from the pain as leg enough?
Just because it seems to go hand in hand with that. If you push it, if he's in pain, he's got to be on painkillers. If he's on painkillers, let him be on too many painkillers and let him be defending it. I don't have a pain problem. I have a pain management problem. Sorry, I don't have a pain management problem. I have a pain problem. That's what he said. And again, that was one of the only notes we got from Standards of Practice, interestingly enough, at the beginning, which was a perfectly fine note. Was they said, we have no problem with being an addict, and we got Vicodin's a brand name. We got permission to do that. But they said, just don't treat it as a joke. Treat the addiction honestly, which I like to think we did.
Yes, definitely. And then you piled some hallucinations on top of that. So why did you then amp it up again to that?
As it was because we had to deal with it. Because you can't just, you cannot set up a person as an addict in episode 1 and then just not have that rear its ugly head as you're going down the road. You have to deal with it. Either he gets off the drugs or it affects him physically or it affects him psychologically. Those are your choices. So we chose psychologically and physically and got him off at one point. But
and you also had him check into a mental health facility, and you ultimately imprisoned him. Again, what did upping those stakes each time add to the show?
He is our central character, and so giving him situations, throwing him into different situations, emotionally and actually physically into a different space, is just interesting. Just seeing how he will react to those situations is interesting, and it keeps the show fresh. We were very conscious of doing departure-type episodes a couple times a year. We needed the formula in order to depart from the formula, and we needed to do the formula very well, but I think it was also important to depart from the formula. But it was just interesting to explore those things, and again, just honesty dictates, if you're going to study a guy for 177 episodes who has an addiction and is obviously dealing with some mental health issues, you have to deal with him. And he's going to make some bad choices, or he's going to make some good choices.
Understanding what you were saying before about not getting too far ahead of yourself in terms of planning, never knowing how long the show was going to be on, at what point did you decide that House and Cuddy were going to have a romantic relationship, and when did you decide to have that realized?
Every single season we talked about it. We would, we go, there's, clearly there was sexual tension there. Clearly we had to go there at some point. But just as producers, there's an awareness that when you relieve the sexual tension by having sex, something changes, and it usually takes some. Tension is good. Tension is good. You remove the tension, you lose tension. Sam and Diane from Cheers, most famous example, where there's sort of, it's a cautionary tale, maybe unfairly so. I'm not sure, but cautionary tale. And so we were aware of that, but we also knew we had to go to it eventually, and we kept thinking about it every year and kept putting it off, and then finally we said, I think Katie Jacobs said, let's do it this year. And I went, yeah, okay.
And ultimately Cuddy left the series. Did you feel like you had just played out that storyline? No. She left the series because of contractual issues. Our budget they decided to pull back on our budget, and they started renegotiating with everybody. And they were trying to turn a huge ship around. Budgets on successful shows tend to go up very quickly. And you can have a budget go up very quickly. It's easy to have a budget go up very quickly. It's tough to have it go down very quickly. And I wanted her to stay. I was not done with that story. As it turns out, unfortunately, in some ways, we had ended the previous season in a way that actually opened the door to that. But NBC Universal played hardball, and she played hardball back, and it didn't work out. House and Wilson obviously had the other main relationship in the show, so talk about their relationship. That was,
I think, I suppose not unique, but close to unique thing. And in some ways, the thing I'm most proud of in the show, in terms of the relationships, that male friendship thing. I just don't think you see that on TV a lot. You see wingmen on TV. You see friends who's trying to get the friend fixed up or something like that. But just two guys who care about each other, but in a guy way, whatever the hell that means, and just stand by each other and don't stand by each other and deal with each other, but genuinely care about each other as friends, is, I think, a very unusual thing on TV. And I really liked it. I enjoyed doing that.
It worked really well. You were nominated for quite a number of episodes and for quite a number of Emmys, and you won an Emmy for writing. Contrasting your earlier experience at the Emmys, how did it feel? How did it feel to get these honors?
It was much less boring when I won. Actually, my experience at the Emmys every single year, because I went, I was nominated for the writing and won for the writing the first year, and then seasons 2, 3, 4, and 5, we were nominated for show. And 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, I think Hugh was nominated for acting. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, or something like that. Maybe it wasn't in 1, but he was nominated over and over and over again, and it'll go down in history as a great mistake that he never won. Every year it was the same thing. I was miserable until after I knew whether we won or lost. I think it's just nerves about making a speech in front of millions of people. I attached so much importance to that. So once I knew I wasn't going to have to make a speech, I was fine. And then the one time I did have to make a speech, it went fine, so I was okay. And because I had a trophy. So it was fun at that point. But yeah, it's not, so you're just sitting there worried for an hour and a half or whatever it is.
Talk about the episode that I had right in front of me a second ago, Three Stories, which was a really pivotal episode in the series. Just talk briefly about that episode.
That was our first time doing a major departure from our formula. It had been something I'd had in my mind from the beginning, in a sense. Number one, to do house lecturing. I wanted to do that. I thought he'd be an interesting lecturer to students. Number two, I wanted to do a origin story to figure out how his leg had happened. And those are the two things. And then I can't remember when it happened, but it was, I knew he'd be lecturing, and I thought, okay, what if he's lecturing about, it might have been David Foster who had the idea of doing three. I wanted him to be telling several different stories. Foster, our doctor, a writer and a consultant on the show, or he was not a consultant, he was a writer on the show, but he was also a doctor, and he said, what if they all have the same symptom? And I thought that was great. And so just him dealing with the class while telling three stories with three very different outcomes. At one point it was four stories. I cut a story out of it. I pitched the network in a very general sense. I never did an outline on that script because it just was too complicated, but I knew the basic stories because it's being told in a very strange way, and flashing back and forth, and halfway through it we revealed that one of the sick people is House. We hide the identity of all of them at the beginning and had some fun with that. So there was fun had with that, you know. And it was a strange, because as I was writing, so, you know, number one, you know, 50 scenes, we would typically do something like that in season one, and our Garrett Vandermeer, who was our line producer, our producer on the show, and he would worry about things like that. And I came into him and go, I'm in the middle of Act 3 and I'm on scene 84. Because it was just, it was tiny little scenes back and forth and back and forth, and he was okay with that. And then I wasn't quite, I remember when I was done with it, I mean, I'm not that self-delusional. I don't generally fall in love with my own stuff, but I remember thinking this is either the best thing I've ever written or the worst thing I've ever written. And I was genuinely not sure. I was genuinely wondering, is this just way too self-indulgent? Is it just goofy? And then other people read it and seemed to like it, and Tommy Moran, one of my executive producers, not one to just fawn over people or get excited about things, walked in my office and said, I think you won an Emmy. Even before we filmed it, and then we got Paris Barclay in, who directed it and did a great job, and Hugh was fantastic. And Hugh was not sure. Hugh said when he read the script, he says, I think it's, I don't want you to think I think it's a bad script. I think it's a great script. I'm just worried that we're telling it too early. I ignored him. I said, that's the only script I got, so we're shooting this one.
So, season 8 was the last season of House. Why did the series come to an end?
There's only so long that I can physically do this. I didn't want it to end unexpectedly. I didn't want to be caught off guard with the end. At that point, at the beginning, I would have been fine with that. Just, you know, whenever the ratings aren't good enough, fine. But we'd gone on long enough and had enough success, and it was important enough to me. It was important to me from the beginning. But, you know, I had earned a certain luxury from that point of view. And so I wanted to end it on my terms. And so after the difficult negotiations between season 7 and season 8, I thought I made it clear, I did make it clear, that if I don't know for sure that there's a season 9 by the fall, there's not going to be a season 9. I just can't wait that long. I have to be able to plan the end of the show. So if it's at all a question mark, I have to be able to plan the end of the show. So for a while in the fall, we were, to some extent, making 2 plans in the writer's room. One if it's season 8 of 9, and one if it's season 8 of 8. And I had to make a call, and then there were some panic discussions about possibly keeping it going, doing stuff. NBC Universal certainly wanted to keep going. I just felt it had, you know, as Hugh said, House is the guy who's going to leave the party earlier rather than later. So.
And during the course of the final episode, everybody thinks that House has officially left the party and died. So how did you, was that a twist that you kept secret, that he was actually alive?
Yeah.
Who knew, and how
we'd had some leaks in the past that we had to investigate and actually stop. So I was very concerned about that because I knew there'd be more focus on this. Everybody was great about that. I remember we came up with the idea. I liked the idea a lot. The last act of that episode was not delivered to the studio, not delivered to the network. The people that had to see it were invited to come over to my office and read it. The cast and crew didn't get the last act of the episode until very, very well. Some members of the eventually, you finally did it, but we made it very clear that that this is not to go elsewhere. There were watermarks on the scripts and stuff like that. The scene that was House's funeral was shot with in the episode as it aired, there's a picture of House at the front of that. There were a number of extras in that scene. So that was shot with just a blank piece of paper there, and we filled in that picture in post, which is the same thing we did for Kuttner's funeral several years earlier for the same reason. So, yeah, I was somewhat stunned that we managed to keep that a secret.
And did you ever shoot any alternate endings?
Didn't shoot an alternate ending, but as I said, there was stuff in there that looked like it might have been an ending, but we talked about doing. I mean, that's expensive.
And in your mind, was the only option to have House and Wilson ride off into the sunset together?
I'm sure it wasn't the only option. It was, it was a bittersweet ending. The only option to me, I wasn't going to do a happy ending. I also didn't want to do just a miserable ending, and that felt right. It felt like right in the middle. That on the face of it, it's a happy ending, but on the other hand, Wilson's dying. They're going to ride off in to the sunset for 6 to 8 months, and then Wilson's dead. So there was a bittersweet aspect to it. It was probably closer to happy than I'm used to on the show, but it felt good. It felt right. I'm sure we discussed a whole bunch of alternatives, which I'm not even going to mention because that just gives rise to people going, "Oh, that would have been better." But I really liked that one. And again, by the way, at the end, just a little nod to Sherlock Holmes, who in fact apparently died but then came back to life.
And at the end of the day, is House everything you would have wanted it to be?
And more, I guess. Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it's actually literally and more. For whatever reason, people, did you imagine it would be this sort of success? And the answer is no, and not because I imagined it would be here. I was thrilled to have a show on the air, and I didn't even think in these terms. It's not like I said it would be this and no better. I just thought, it's on the air. That's fantastic. And that's really all I wanted. And I thought that I was doing kind of this weird, quirky, niche character, as I said before, and to have everybody, not everybody, but apparently 80+ million people around the world watch it is crazy.
Absolutely. After that, you worked on a project called Alibi.
That was during it. That was in the middle of, I had 2 other pilot experiences after House started. One was Alibi, which I co-wrote with Peter Blake, and as I said, these were not as pleasant pilot experiences, and it just ultimately didn't work, and NBC didn't put it on the air.
And the other was the Rockford Files.
Yeah.
And why do you think that one didn't go?
Oh, I'm not going to say anything about that.
Okay.
But it ultimately just didn't quite work the way I had hoped it would, and it's unfortunate because it's a great idea and should be done.
Yeah, fair enough. You have a new pilot in development. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
I actually have 2 pilots in development, and so hopefully when people watch this, they'll be massive hits or something, because I do think in those terms now. Is one a legal sort of storefront, legal Operation X cop who becomes a lawyer and just struggling to get by in a storefront law office. and that I'm going to be writing on my own. And then I sold that to ABC, and then I've sold a cop show, an interesting cop show that I'm co-writing with Peter Tolan, to Fox.
Oh, great. In general, what do you think is the key to creating a successful series?
You know, that's an impossible question to answer. I mean, I go back to a few things. One, write what you find interesting, because it's crazy to try and guess what other people will find interesting. And I think even if you succeed with that, you're not going to feel good about it. When you write something that you like and hope you find an audience, then you can feel good about it, and you're more likely to succeed. And I think there's too much of this industry which is just cynically trying to think what lesser people will like. I wouldn't like it, but other people will, because they're dumb. I don't know what they're thinking, but trying to calculate what other people like is a big mistake. Number two, complicated stuff. Complicated characters. I used to have, and respect for the other side, you know, not just straw men. I find don't preach. This is just connected to the same thing. Television is not about preaching. Television is about exploring issues. Storytelling is about exploring issues, not about preaching. I used to have an assignment I would give the writers on family law, where it's too many writers just go, I'm going to write about the little guy against the big evil guy, and so the big evil guy does something evil, and I would ask the writer, why did he do that? Because he's evil. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but only slightly. I go, but why does he think he's doing it? Evil people don't think they're evil. You know, people that disagree with you don't think they're evil. People that disagree with you have thought this out and just come to a different conclusion than you have. And so I used to have this assignment I'd give my writers on family law. Pick any issue, and it didn't have to connect to any story. It didn't have to even theoretically connect to any story. Pick any issue on any area, politics, religion, science, anything, and write a paragraph of what you believe, and then write a second paragraph of what people who fundamentally disagree with you believe. And I just don't think writers do that enough. There's not this recognition of that the person who disagrees with you has thought it through as well and just reached a different conclusion. Which is a long way of saying, write real people, right? You know, and I go back to the beginning. Don't just be glib. Just because a joke is funny doesn't mean it helps your story. So just write real people. It all comes from that.
Right. What's been the highlight of your career so far?
House. I mean, the 8 years of House by far. I mean, not surprisingly, the people that are watching this aren't watching because they're big fans of family law. I enjoyed that. I mean, my career is just, I did enjoy it. It was a great show. But, you know, as I think I alluded to before, it's just crazy. I mean, you know, I'm just a guy, you know, and I came to this. I find it difficult to wrap my head around the whole artist thing. I'm a lawyer in my heart still, but I had something to say, and I wanted to say it, and to be able to say it and say my own personal point of view and have 80 million people listen to that around the world. And it's very gratifying. People from these diverse cultures that we think are so different are responding to the same thing. And it's my stuff is amazing.
Has the expansion of cable and broadband impacted your work at all?
The ratings keep going down. No, I think actually cable's done such fantastic, dramatic shows that I think it's pushing the networks to try harder sometimes, and then sometimes the networks just give up. But there's more good shows on TV, and that's all I really care about, is an opportunity to tell good stories.
And what advice would you give someone who is starting out as a writer and producer in television today?
It's why I go back to what I've said, I think now 3 times in this, is write what you like and hope you find an audience. And if you don't, then you shouldn't be writing, which is fine. Now, I have to put a caveat on that. When you're a young writer, when you're working for somebody, the job is not to tell your story. I mean, you want to bring your experiences and all that to the job, but the job is to do somebody else's show. You know, that a writer on House, their job was to deliver my show, not their show. And it's tempting. You come into a show and you go, oh, I know how I can make this better. No, you don't. Not really. I mean, the show is exactly the way they want it to be, and your job is to help them continue that. But bring your own voice to it.
And last question, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
I used to think in those terms. I less do now. I mean, I used to be, that's back to the advice. I used to tell writers, particularly in negotiations, but don't worry about how much you're making. Worry about how much you're going to be making in 5 years. Worry about where you want to be in 5 years. And don't turn down a job because of the money. Do the show you want to do that's going to open the doors, that are going to open doors, that are going to open doors, that figure out where you want to be in 5 years. I hope relaxing. That's all. I just hope relaxing.
That's great. Well, thank you very much on behalf of the Archive of American Television.
Thank you. Thank you.